dedicate your first hours of the week to this process testifies to your commitment and your deep concern for the exercise that we are engaged in. Your Excellency, it is a given that we live and exist at a very unique interstitial moment between what is or what was and what is to be. Your Excellency, major disruptive and interconnected global trends are at play at the same time. From the technological revolution, demographic shifts, the climate cataclysms, economic and debt distresses, the erosion of democracy, geopolitical power transitions, notably the emerging shift from a world-centered or from a global economy that is centered on Northern Atlantic, and a notable shift eastwards, urbanization, health pandemics, and a fraying multilateral order, an order that is unable to provide guardrails for negotiating global public goods or halting conflicts. These are the major trends that we are confronted with at the moment. Your Excellency, and because what is, that is the normative and institutional architectures, no longer suffice, and what is to replace them remain yet unclear and unconcretized. We are therefore in this space, this interregnum, negotiating the future while maintaining a transitional presence. At such interstices in the existing fabric, we must seek stability, certainty, and order while cultivating change. Change as the process of successive replacement of anchor practices. We must continue to work with the existing through the responsible and innovative use of the existing fabric. We must repair the existing and make it more functional. And therefore, Your Excellency, it is for that reason that at the beginning of this year you asked us to relook at the 2014 foreign policy of the Republic of Kenya, with a view to reviewing it, given all these changes. Your Excellency, we have engaged in an exercise that has been deeply, deeply humbling, but also deeply consultative. This exercise has enabled us to listen to many voices and appreciate many perspectives. We have paused and taken note of some of the decisions that we may have taken that may be out of tandem with the tempo of the expectations of citizens, but we've also, Excellency, taken appreciation of the fact that we have been consistent in our compliance with our obligations as a rule-respecting state on the continent. This exercise, Your Excellency, has now reached a very pivotal point, the point at which we come back to the same stakeholders whom we have consulted in the process, to again seek their appreciation that in fact we did listen and that we did incorporate their views. That is a purpose for this validation. Your Excellency, therefore, it is my humble privilege to request you to share your thoughts ahead of the exercise that is before us. Let's put our hands together and welcome His Excellency the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kenya to make his remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, P.S. Singoe. My fellow Kenyans, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is with great honor and pleasure that I welcome you today to this public stakeholders validation forum of our foreign policy document. I thank you all for responding to our invitation and making time to be here. The Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs has had a series of engagements with diverse stakeholders as part of the process of reviewing Kenya's 2014 foreign policy document. The objective is to broaden and deepen our reach to Kenyans and make a foreign policy that reflects the aspirations of our nation. Looking back, our foreign policy has been detached, mysterious, and closed to the public, making it actually foreign to Kenyans. We have decided to break from this past situation and take foreign policy to the people to ensure that we move along with Kenyans in our diplomatic engagements. After all, public participation is a fundamental principle of Kenya's democratic governance and is enshrined in our country's constitution. In this review process, more than before, we have held several roundtable discussions and consultations with a wide range of stakeholders, including government ministries, departments and agencies, civil society organizations, media, academicians, ambassadors and high commissioners, the Council of Governors, Parliament, youth, judiciary, among others. Indeed, this is a foreign policy of the Republic of Kenya, and therefore should be anchored on broadened ownership, which includes all arms of government, the county governments, and most important, Kenyan citizens. Your presence here today marks a major milestone towards the climax of the review process of our foreign policy. We look forward to your input in firming up this foreign policy document after today's public validation exercise. There shall follow a high-level retreat with His Excellency the President, William Ruto, to finalize the process. Notably, this is the first time in our history that the foreign policy review and development process will culminate in a sessional paper that will be tabled in Parliament for deliberations. This will further widen the avenue for public input through elected representatives. There is also need for consequential amendments to the Foreign Service Act of 2021 to make it fit for purpose in the mutating geopolitical landscape and the pressing diplomatic realities of our time. Additionally, the pursuit of national interests in the international arena has operational costs. Thus, the sessional paper shall aim at drawing Parliament's attention to the cost implications of our foreign policy formulation and implementation. The growing returns from our diplomatic engagements justify the need to increase the budgetary allocation for the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs. We are grateful to our President, His Excellency William Ruto, as he continues to set pace as Kenya's chief diplomat by actively engaging in strategic diplomatic activities. Accordingly, Kenya has been able to sign mutually beneficial agreements in order to expand trade opportunities for our people, diversify creative economy prospects, and secure labor mobility agreements to address youth unemployment. Further, our country has received more international scholarships, seen a rise in public-private partnerships that are spurring infrastructural development in Kenya, and increased international engagements that flourish tourism and guarantee our peace and security, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, the ultimate goal of a country's foreign policy is to provide a blueprint and a strategy for achieving its national interests in line with the common good of the nation and shared prosperity. Therefore, the Kenya public has a frontline role in contributing to the formulation and implementation of foreign policy. This, I repeat, is the reason we are all gathered here today. Just as a reflection, what is the role of citizens in appreciating and promoting our country's national interests whenever our people interact with the international environment? How can we utilize our foreign policy to inculcate in our people patriotism and a fervent desire to positively project our country's image in the international arena? In short, we must close the missing link between the country's foreign policy and the citizens' understanding and engagement in our international affairs. In conclusion, I encourage you to have a candid discussion and an in-depth interrogation of the document to ensure that the final product of this foreign policy review process captures the perspectives and wishes of Kenyan citizens. Before I step off the podium, let me also appreciate our partners, the UNHCR, CONRAD, the Stockholm Environmental Institute, the Council of the New Global South, and the other that may not be on this list, but who have supported us in one way or the other, including our ambassadors emeritus, who were part of this very, very important journey. So, here we are. Please speak frankly. Let us hear you out. Foreign policy is a critical public good, but it's also very elusive, and we must find some common ground. Not too long ago, young people in Kenya were asking, why does the President of Kenya make foreign trips? Maybe an answer may be found here today. We also are facing interesting challenges. I am a politician, and sometimes you are inclined to try and imagine that your wish or your desire coincides with national good, and sometimes they may be at variance. But there are critical issues that we must deal with. For instance, how can we motivate our foreign service? What can we do to anchor good men and women out there as they work? What is a professional foreign service? Do we play the traditional game of you ignore the career foreign service, trained diplomats, and then fill the foreign service with villagers from Mululu, where I was born? Should we, as a Kenyan people, maybe now decide whether we need to have a ratio of proportionality, so that to what extent do we work with the trained people, and to what extent do we infuse some new blood into a foreign service? This kind of balance, we've never quite talked about it as Kenyans. Perhaps this is an opportunity. I was in Parliament a few weeks ago answering questions, and I'll not name the person, but he's a senator, and he told me, Mr. Minister, can you tell me or assure this House that our diplomatic service reflects the face of Kenya? And can you name a high-level diplomat from my area? I was extremely worried. I was sitting on the edge. Because that is a question we must answer and resolve today. Does our foreign service reflect the face of Kenya? How does it play out on matters gender? Does it? Now, if you want to go forward, how do we build on our consultations and find answers and practices that can be more appropriate for our people? When I talk of the budget that will go as a comment that goes into the sessional paper, what happens when you do not resource a foreign service? Do you compromise a nation? Is the security of a nation under threat? Are the national interests under threat? So these are the kind of issues that I really want you good men and women to help us interrogate, so that we can come up with good solutions. The global trends, as you've heard, are changing. We take pride in Kenya as hosting the UN system here, the largest in the global south. Today, we also take pride that Kenya is host to the largest World Bank office outside Washington. How do we leverage on that to consolidate Kenya's position as a financial hub? And from there, springboard into providing very supportive engagements for our neighbors. So a good balance again between those kind of conversations and what we are doing, I think, and many others, will really help us to handle our foreign policy. And perhaps you could also tell us where you think we have been ambiguous and we need clarity. Let it come from the citizenry that they need clarity on certain fundamental issues. Maybe this is the moment. But most important, let us all now develop a foreign policy that is Kenyan. I'm not saying that we've never had a policy. We've had it. It was even documented, as you can hear. But the new areas that we must chart is that the Constitution is very clear about public participation, public engagement, and broadening ownership. That was not there in the past, but our new Constitution demands that. The 2010 Constitution, they say it is transformative. If you are to ask me, can you run away from the civil society? I think it's not possible anymore. If you look at the anchor around the Constitution of 2010, there was a very strong input from the civil society. So we are living in these new times, and it is absolutely important that we recognize that there are new players. Even in football, we have a season when there's Pele, then we had the Messis of this world, and now we are looking forward to seeing other players in the arena. So in this foreign space, foreign policy space, let us also crystallize on what is the gem for Kenya and how do we move forward and keep our profile where it should be. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I wish you extremely successful deliberations, and we look forward to your inputs. Thank you so much.
Another round of applause for the PCS, please. Thank you very much. So, just as you've heard in the remarks by the Prime Cabinet Secretary and also the PCS, I can assure you that the engagement we've had and the support from both the PS and the PCS has been very deep. The interactions in terms of even the documents, the content, even sharing with us, the team which has been drafting this foreign policy, is very unique. So the engagement is not just about the remarks which you heard from the floor here, but we've had a lot of sit-down, round-table meetings with both to guide this process. So when you have to look at, when you see the final product, actually to reflect the statement you've had today. And we want to appreciate both the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the PS for that kind of engagement, which is very unique. Even our program today, therefore, reflects the diversity of that kind of stakeholder participation, the fact that we wanted the ownership of the foreign policy to go down and get involved by everybody. And with that, therefore, I want to invite Professor George Outa, who has been one of the experts we've been working with. Since the review process started, we've worked with many experts, and one of the final experts we're working with in terms of the editing, the polishing of the document is Professor Outa, who will take us through the foreign policy. He has, Professor has very wide government or public expertise. From the time of the Kenya Vision 2030, worked in different government departments as far as government policy documents are concerned. So he has a wealth of experience as far as this is concerned. And is one of those great minds we have tapped into, among others, to work with us. And you'll be hearing others when we come to the panel discussion. So he'll give us the highlights, and then we'll have a deep dive into some of the issues from the panelists after we listen to this presentation. So, Professor, please.
Your Excellency, Prime Cabinet Secretary, the Principal Secretary for the State Department of Foreign Affairs, and the representative, my good friend Ambassador Kabira, the review team that has participated in the preparation of this revised foreign policy of our republic, led by Ambassador Lucy and my friend Ambassador Masila here, all members of the State Department of Foreign Affairs, both serving ambassadors and those who have retired but whose expertise has informed this process. Distinguished participants to this session, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a humbling moment for me, having been requested to provide the highlights of the reviewed policy. It is really my pleasure to do so. Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, it is really a great honor that you requested that we do this. We come a long way with you, so I was not very worried about this. So without really wasting my time, it is my considered opinion that the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the powerful statement made by the Principal Secretary has actually laid the foundation of what I want to highlight here, and I'll try to keep it short. So if you go to the very first slide, let me just say, as has been already stressed here, that this is a product of a fairly extended period of consultation, which is in line with our constitutional requirements. And a review committee that I've just mentioned actually has been trying to finalize what becomes the key issues of our revised foreign policy. What we have so far, which requires your validation, is a document that has tried to professionally synthesize the issues, the perspectives, the opinions that you shared with the team over that extended period of consultation. The document that you will see is actually presented in 4 substantive sections. Of course, there are preliminary parts, but the focus area is actually 4 substantive sections, with chapter 1 or section 1 of that policy focused on setting the context. And in that section, basically like all good publications do, and the way that all good reports do, we provide a brisk history of the evolution of Kenya's foreign policy. I know many scholars try to locate the foreign policies just from the period of independence, but of course we can take judicial or public notice of the fact that actually the foreign policy evolution possibly predates independence and go back into the colonial times, where even some of our nationalists were involved in some kind of quasi-diplomatic relations. So chapter 1 provides that particular context, but a key thing that I would like to emphasize there is the pivotal moment that the Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary referred to, the 2014 era, when we actually had the first published and documented foreign policy. Now, in chapter 2 of that particular document, we present actually a key area in normal international relations, that is the bilateral and multilateral engagement that the country actually is involved with. But it also includes plurilateral and minilateral engagements. Those words are sometimes mouthy, and because we are talking to the public, it is important to just say that it also means the smaller groupings of countries, usually more focused on trade. So we highlight that because in traditional international relations, both bilateral and multilateral engagements are extremely important. So we do that, but it is important to underline that that chapter also defines that Kenya's foreign policy begins from the immediate diplomatic neighborhood. And therefore, we canvass discussions around our immediate neighbor. We cannot really foray into international arena without defining and paying attention to an immediate diplomatic neighborhood, because they are critical to what we shall see shortly as our national interest. And then, of course, there is Chapter 3 of that document, which summarizes the operating environment and especially the current policy of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. But what I want to really underline in our Chapter 3 is what the Prime Cabinet Secretary was gesturing to here. The emergence of new challenges and therefore new frontiers of diplomacy that have actually not been part of orthodox diplomatic or international relations. And therefore, we pay quite some copious attention to those new areas, partly to ensure inclusiveness and participation of the citizen. And those areas include the judiciary that was mentioned here. The judiciary was not normally part of international relations, but as I'll say just shortly, now these are emerging areas. The interface with county governments is becoming an important area of international relations. The private sector, the civil society organizations that have also been mentioned, you cannot just run away from them, and therefore we provide the sense that the current foreign policy will actually work with civil society organizations in a way that has never been done before. And last but not least, of course, is media. I'll use media to illustrate in a few minutes. Faith-based organizations. And of course, not to forget women and youth and persons with disabilities. So there's a ferocious attempt to bring on board all segments of our society. Now, in that foreign policy, Section 4, or Chapter 4, if you like, is the substantive part. And allow me, Prime Cabinet Secretary, just to linger on there for a few minutes, because that is really the heart of the matter, insofar as our desire or our quest for a foreign policy is concerned. Now, just before going into the foreign policy areas, remember that, of course, we have the objectives of Kenya's foreign policy. There are actually 10 objectives to the revised foreign policy. I will not read all of them because but I have highlighted, if you can see on the screen, I have only pitched 2 or 3. One of the most important objectives of any foreign policy is to protect Kenya's sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's the one I'm highlighting because it's so important. Sovereignty and territorial integrity. In other words, the protection of what in other jurisdictions would be called the homeland. And then, of course, another important objective is to project, to promote, and protect the country's image and prestige globally. And hence, some of the issues that are being raised here regarding the cost implications of maintaining. So the projection and promotion of the image and prestige of our country globally is an important objective. The other one, the last one I'll highlight, there are 10, but I've only highlighted 3, is to position Kenya as the premier global capital for environment and climate governance, given, of course, our distinct advantage of being host to. So there are those objectives which are also contained in the first chapter. But I want to linger briefly on the crucial areas which are covered in Chapter 4 or Section 4 of the revised foreign policy. After a lot of reflections, a lot of discussions with the experts, we have at least up to now identified 8 focus areas. The policy describes them as the 8 focus areas. And those focus areas, in an attempt to put some hierarchy to them, the first one, the first focus area of this policy is peace and security diplomacy. And I've just pitched a little sentence that the ultimate goal of our peace and security diplomacy is to safeguard Kenya's sovereignty. This is a traditional core area which some of you who are in this discipline know emanates actually, this is really the reason why the United Nations Charter was actually founded, to ensure that there's global peace and security. This is very important to us. And therefore, That under that diplomacy, Kenya will try to preserve all the fundamental human rights, ensure democracy, and ensure the prosperity and well-being of the people of Kenya. So that is the first area. The second focus area of this policy is economic and commercial diplomacy. And it bears emphasizing, and that is why I've highlighted it in red there, that this is an extremely crucial component of Kenya's foreign policy. And those of you who are in foreign service here know that since 2014, the country's foreign policy started shifting and emphasizing economic diplomacy. I think that is the hallmark of the 2014 achievement. And therefore, this is an extremely important component. Prime Cabinet Secretary has already alluded to the fact that Kenya is a regional financial hub due to a well-developed and diversified financial sector that is backed by the country's strong banking sector with branches across Kenya. I think a key thing that has been mentioned is also the fact that Kenya hosts the largest World Bank station outside of Washington, D.C. And therefore, under this policy, diplomatic efforts will continue to be deployed to promote and guarantee operations of these critical multilateral and financial institutions. I thought I should emphasize this because perhaps maybe in the past we have not been leveraging enough on institutions such as the World Bank that are here, UNEP and so on. So this is a crucial part of our economic and commercial diplomacy. And to say that under that pillar there are a lot of other elements, almost 6 of them, covering trade and investment, the private sector, and so on, as you will see in the detailed document. The third focus area under this policy is the sustainable oceans diplomacy. In the past, in this country, of course, we have talked about the blue economy, which is quite linked to this one, because in other terms, the blue economy is an encompassing phrase that includes the ocean. But under this policy, Kenya takes cognizance of the singular importance of its ocean, and therefore the sustainable oceans diplomacy, of which Kenya will strengthen her position as a regional and global leader in oceans and blue economy development, so that our country can contribute meaningfully to global efforts in ocean governance. Those of you who are here in 2018 know just how big this blue economy area is. If you forget about the ocean, you think about the ships, and you think about the pharmaceutical potential. It is one of the hugest and subsumed, obviously, big strength to our economic and commercial diplomacy. The next one is, the next focus area under this foreign policy is global governance and multilateral diplomacy. This is a traditional area in international engagements, and there's a strong promise under this policy that Kenya's diplomatic engagement within the context of global governance and multilateral space will continue to be purposive and proactive, building on existing networks across the globe and promoting sustainable public-private partnerships. I think this is one area where our Kenyan diplomats have excelled quite a bit, and I think the promise in the policy is that this will continue. Some of you may want to know that some of the leading global multilateral frameworks in the world actually were negotiated in Nairobi, the CBDs, and therefore this is an area that I'm personally confident that we are very strong on. The fifth focus area is environment and climate diplomacy. Some people say climate change diplomacy as a matter of fact. Environment and climate diplomacy, needless to say, all of us are aware that the UNFCCC annual conference of the parties is going on in Baku, and just to emphasize that this is now one of the most topical and important areas that no country can afford to ignore. And under this policy, Kenya is going to accelerate, because we are endowed with many diverse flora and fauna and other natural resources that support millions of livelihoods, economy, and so on. But also, Kenya, as I've already said, is the headquarters of UNEP, also UN Habitat, and these are the only headquarters in the global south of the UN as an organization. So under this policy, Kenya will continue to support, guarantee smooth operations, and to promote the enhancement of the status and the strengthening of these UN agencies. And of course, to continue, in my understanding, in contributing to climate action, including at Baku, as we speak here. The sixth focus area is science, technology, and innovation diplomacy. This is fairly self-explanatory because the focus on STI, or science, technology, and innovation, reflects our commitment to international collaborations and partnerships that aim at attracting critical investments and fostering the exchange of knowledge for addressing global challenges. Needless to say, this is the one area that has grown in leaps and bounds, and it is important that our foreign policy actually puts a radar or an eye on this segment for the singular purpose of ensuring that we are also not left behind in the area of science, technology, and innovation. And very well elaborated in the policy, the significance of artificial intelligence now, machine learning, and of course, the impact of social media. So science, technology, and innovation will be another area. The seventh area has also been mentioned, and which Ambassador Kabiri highlighted here, diaspora diplomacy. This is hinged on the conceptual framework that protects, engages, and empowers the Kenyan diaspora community to enhance their prosperity and that of the nation. It bears repeating that, of course, we all know the huge contribution that the diaspora community is making in terms of remittances and investments back home. Last but not least, I say but not least because even though this is last here, it's because we cannot put everything. We identified from discussions and this consultations, the last area is the social cultural diplomacy, which will also be pursued. So Kenya will continue to harness our social and cultural opportunities to enhance our standing in the international arena. This is a huge area that includes sports, that include recognizing the importance of our cultural heritage. And one addition that I remember being discussed quite strongly is, of course, attempts to ensure that Kenya's cultural heritage that was for some reason or the other appropriated out of the country will actually be brought back. Now, as I try to include, let me just mention briefly one thing that is also important and canvassed. I've mentioned there that there are new and emerging trends in diplomacy that the traditional diplomat of the 1960s would never have imagined. So I just want to linger there for a minute and to state that Kenya's foreign policy, the revised policy that we are presenting here today, recognizes these new frontiers and emerging trends. And the one I just want to cover, I'll not talk about all of them. I've mentioned judicial interface, but let me, for illustration purposes, just talk about media in Kenya's foreign policy, and to emphasize that we think that from what we have seen, the media is going to be an important partner in this process because Kenya upholds the freedom of the press and recognizes the role of the media, both national and international, in the promotion and implementation of the country's foreign policy. We are also a regional media powerhouse, hosting almost 30 leading global media houses. And locally, you know that we have almost 50 television channels, and therefore this is one area that we think is going to be important. So I just wanted to highlight that to rest assure people that there are new trends that were not in the traditional diplomacy, but which this policy has captured. So, Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, I would like to leave it at that on the highlights, and hopefully that a lot of this also will come up in the discussion, that in the next few days we are able to complete this process and have a coherent professional document that will be the pride of all of us. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Outa. I want now to hand over the next segment of this program to Dr. Kemoli Sagala to take us through the next section, which is the panel discussion. And I request that Dr. Kemoli and the panelists please move forward to the seats there. Yes, I think you have enough mics there, so you can use the mics you have.
Thank you. I'm used to a tradition at the National Defense College, as I wait for my other panelists to join us, where you always ask for permission to proceed, and therefore, Your Excellency, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, I indulge to seek permission to proceed on this very, very important engagement that we are going to be having. Our panel discussion is going to be on an assessment based on the review of my 4 panelists. As you can see from my extreme right, I have Ambassador Tom Amolo. Ambassador Tom Amolo is a distinguished career foreign service officer. He was an ambassador. He's retired, but he still offers his insights and intellectual niche to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On my immediate right is Professor Patrick Maluki. He's the chair, Department of Diplomacy and International Studies at the University of Nairobi, and he's also the chair of the Foreign Service Academy, which is the arm that is supposed to provide the training capacity for the Foreign Service to function in the 21st century. On my immediate left, I have Dr. John Karanja. Dr. Karanja is the head of Trade and Foreign Policy Department, and is also the acting director, Directorate of Integrated Development at KIPRA, and many of you know KIPRA. On my extreme left, I am privileged to have Professor Sylvia Kangara. Professor Kangara is a member of the Presidential Council on Economic Advisors. How I intend, or how we have agreed with my panelists to proceed with this moderation because of time, is that each one of them will have 70 minutes to respond to a few questions that I've highlighted. I take note of the fact that the policy has already highlighted by Professor Uta, so we'll not go into so much of the details, but just remember that the distinction between the revised foreign policy and the 2014 is the 2014 had 5 pillars, but now here we have 8 focus areas, and I think we also appreciate that there was a very rich, detailed history of our diplomatic journey from independence to this time, and that there's a new chapter that didn't exist in 2014, which was the operating environment. What I hope to do with my panelists, and this is how I've structured this moderation, is that we have a very short time, but I think if we can achieve 4 aspects of this revised foreign policy, I want them to share with us what they view to be whether or not we have achieved strategic fitness. Strategic fitness is a very important tool in trying to model and understand how our foreign policy operates. I'll then be asking Dr. Karanja here to speak to us on foreign policy is about making business. It's about what benefits are we going to get